ClayFighter 63⅓, which I will be simplifying to just ClayFighter 63 for this video, is basically what happens when you take the essence of 90s Nicktoons and cram them together into a PG-styled fighting game for better and for worse. At its core, ClayFighter 63 is a janky, crude, but still fairly charming example of what fun can cover up in terms of flaws. In terms of the story, you get a bit of text if you forget to press the start button in time, and a bit of character story after you beat each character's route. That's it. Some of the endings are fun, upbeat, and humorous, while others have a bit more of that fighting game twist to them. I do wish that there were after-round quotes and things, and I also wish that at the very least there were sculpted stills of images about what was going on and not just text crawls, but I suppose the fact that anything here at all is nice. Each of the casts are a stereotype or creature played up to extremes. You have the not-so-friendly Mr. Frosty, an acrobatic clown, a twisted evil Suma Santa, a questionable martial artist chef, and plenty of others, including the really cool Mad Dr. End Boss, and cameo appearances from both Earthworm Jim and Booger Man, who I really don't like. Although, let me just say, to unlock the last few boss characters, you can't just play through the game. No, you have to enter in a cheat code to get them. That doesn't sound too bad on paper, but then you have to remember that we have it easy with the internet now, which was not the case when this game came out. Not only that, they reset every time you reset the console, meaning you have to constantly re-enter the codes if you want to use them. It's tedious, and I wish they would just save onto the cartridge, or at least give you the option to save them. But I guess that it is nice that they are cheat codes and not something you have to beat the game every time if you want to get back. ClayFighter 63 is a fairly bare-bones fighting game, but I refuse to say that that's a bad thing. It's very genre newcomer friendly, and easy to get the hang of, but the major issues come with the controls. See, a lot of the special moves seem to just randomly happen, regardless of what button combo you just pressed. Half the time I thought I learned a new move, only to retry said move and perform a completely different one. The plus to this is that I was almost always performing moves, regardless of what I smashed. But the negative is that actually learning this game is a huge pain. That, and sometimes the moves just wouldn't register as they should, if at all. This is one of those games that requires you to have the manual, so that way you can refer to and look at what does what, and so you can know the clatalities. I looked up a few of the finishers online, but never once was I able to perform them myself. Like in most fighting games I play, so alas, I was unable to see them. But it's safe to say they're up on YouTube if you really want to see them. You get a special move meter that charges up, and again, like most of the other moves, even if I swore I figured out the proper input, it would either activate a different one, or it just wouldn't happen at all, despite having the correct amount of charge to perform them. I never found myself losing too often, or getting frustrated for that matter, which is a good thing, especially since I'm not very good at fighting games. At worst, I'll lose a full round and hop right back in. Oh, and the game overs here are super forgiving, allowing you to continue right where you left off, as long as you hit start in time. Something I liked about the block move is that while you would slowly have your health chipped away at if you started at full, once you got to your last sliver of health, you won't actually die as long as you're blocking, which I thought was a nice touch. Another great feature is the fact that instead of rounds, it revolves around which health bar you're on. Basically, you could still have your 2 full bars of health if you smacked your opponent down to 1, and this made the game really balanced, and I preferred this to players' health recharging between rounds like in other fighting games. Something really cool about the stages and the gameplay department was the fact that if you made your way to a specific spot on the map, you could actually enter new areas of the location, or even make your ways to other arenas around the map. It didn't do anything past change the location visuals, but it was neat to have the environments change up while you were fighting. In terms of the controls, I think the heavens above that I was able to use the D-pad and wasn't forced to stick with the analog stick. Using the arrow buttons for most moves and having A and B for basic moves was also nice, with Z allowing you to move around your opponent. Visually, naturally, the game is pretty crusty. There is no way around this, but I actually found both the claymation used for the characters and the weird blocky 3D backdrops and environments are sorta charming in a budget sense. Yeah, they aren't great looking by any means, but they have a weird aura of atmosphere that's aided by the Nintendo 64 graphical style. But before I talk more about the levels, because I do have more to say, the real star is the namesake, that being the use of clay. The characters are all done with claymation, which is really cool in concept. While I think the characters are disgusting, with some of that 90s gross out, well, I don't want to say charm, but cartoon style to it, I still think for what they are, it's interesting to see done. Everyone looked different, and the only 2 models I can say looked bland were Taffy and Blob, which, while having cool transformations, were just very underwhelming overall in their visual presentation. A cool little note too is that when you hit your opponent, instead of gore, items that reflect what they are pop out, like ice cream for bad Mr. Frosty, candy for Taffy, medical equipment for Dr. Killin, and so on. It's just a neat visual touch to have in the game. Back to the stages, I actually liked the majority of them. Ghastly Graveyard was too darn dark, and I hated the gulch level that accompanied Blob, but the rest had a creepy, cold tone that just worked oddly enough in contrast to the silly, over-the-top caricatures that made up the cast. In terms of performance, the game runs, genuinely, to my surprise, really really darn well. I'm running this on an actual Nintendo 64 with a heavily used cartridge, and yet the game ran at an incredibly smooth frame rate and never had any noticeable dips down. Overall, just a fairly darn fluid game, which I was not expecting from such a title such as this. You know what? I like the music quite a bit. It had some very heavily Nintendo 64 sounding songs that reminded me of just random generic tracks other games on the console had. The sound effects for punches and kicks and stuff were meaty enough and served their purpose, but the voice clips outside the announcer
Let's get ready to crumble!
Were as grating as could be.
Now you baby, now you know! Give me a combo!
On the camera!
Oh, man! Bitty combo!
Love you!
Awesome! Early combo!
Get away! Not even close!
The lion! The monkey!
He blow!
Hong Kong the lion! Hong Kong
Get out!
Express switch!
The characters never shut up, and their voices, despite the fact that they are clearly supposed to be silly, just sanded away at my sanity and nerves. I wouldn't mind the occasional jab or comment, especially in the cartoonish voices, but dear god, it never ended. And with all that said, ClayFighters isn't some hidden gem or unexpected masterpiece. It feels like it looks, and that word is budget. It's not a deep game. In fact, I'm pretty sure actual fighting game fans would dislike the game on a personally offended level, but if you're someone who wants a silly, dumb, cartoonish, extremely easy to get into and play brawler of a fighting game, then you can do a whole lot worse. As always, thank you all so much for watching. If you want to help support the channel, please consider sharing the video with a friend or checking out my Patreon linked in the description below. I want to give a big thank you to not only the show's patrons, but also my great friend Orion Knight for making the wonderful Punish Neat that you'll see in both the thumbnail and occasionally in the videos, like right now. Their social media accounts will be linked in the description as well. If you have any comments, questions, or recommendations, leave them in the comments as I read and reply to everything. Until next time, this is Thierry Williamson signing off until the next video. See ya guys!